The desert did not forgive weakness. It only exposed it. The sun hung low over the red plains when the lone rancher reined in his horse, dust curling around his boots as he dismounted. He had lived alone for years, far from towns, far from judgments, far from the war that had carved scars into the land and into men's souls. He came upon the scene by accident, or perhaps fate had grown tired of silence. She stood by the dry riverbed, her hands bound with rough rope, her torn buckskin dress stained with dust and blood. An Apache woman, young but not a child, her eyes sharp even in humiliation. When she realized she was not alone, her breath hitched. "Don't look," she said, her voice breaking despite her effort to sound strong. "Please, just turn away." The rancher froze. He had seen death, ambushes, and cruelty before, but something about the way she stood, chin lifted even while bound, stirred something long buried in him. He turned his head slightly, not out of fear, but out of respect. "I ain't here to harm you," he said quietly. "Who did this?" Her silence answered him louder than words. Tracks circled the sand, boot prints, not moccasins. Men, probably bounty hunters or settlers drunk on hatred. The rope around her wrists was tied cruelly tight, meant to shame as much as restrain. The rancher felt his jaw tighten. "They left you to die," he said. She laughed once, bitter and hollow. That was the mercy. He cut the rope without another word. When her wrists fell free, she swayed but did not collapse. Pride held her upright when her body could not. She met his eyes then, finally, and what he saw there was not fear, but fury, grief, and something dangerously close to hope. "You should not help me," she said. "If they find out—" "Let 'em try," he replied. As night fell, they rode together toward his ranch, the stars bearing witness to a choice that would echo far beyond the plains. And somewhere in the dark, men were already following. The ranch was small, isolated, and perfect for hiding or dying. She stood at the edge of the porch, unsure whether to step inside, as if crossing that threshold meant surrendering something she could never reclaim. The rancher set a blanket down gently. "You're safe here. For now." "No place is safe," she said. "Not for my people." "Not anymore." As the fire crackled, she finally spoke of what had happened. Her name was Ayanna. She was the daughter of a respected Apache scout, captured while guiding survivors away from a burned village. The men who caught her had wanted information. When she gave them none, they chose humiliation instead. "How humiliating," she whispered, staring into the flames. "To be left like an animal, waiting for strangers to decide my worth." The rancher listened without interrupting. When she finished, he stood and retrieved an old rifle from the wall. "They'll come," he said, "and when they do, they'll find this land ain't theirs to poison." At dawn, the riders arrived. Shots rang out. Dust and fire filled the air. The rancher fought like a man with nothing left to lose, and Ayanna fought like a woman who had already lost everything. Together, they held the line, not just for survival, but for dignity. When the last rider fell and silence returned, Ayanna stood tall, bloodied but unbroken. She looked at the rancher and saw not a savior, but an ally. "You did not turn away," she said, "when I begged you to." He shook his head. Some things shouldn't be ignored. As she prepared to leave, the land no longer felt quite as empty. Two lives had collided, and neither would walk the same path again. Some stories are about the West, others are about honor, and the strongest ones are about choosing humanity when cruelty is easier. The desert did not forget what happened at the ranch. Blood had soaked into the soil, and the wind carried the story farther than any rider could. By the third morning after the gunfight, vultures circled where the bodies had fallen, and rumors began to move like ghosts, whispers, of a lone rancher who stood against armed men, and an Apache woman who fought beside him as if the land itself had risen in her shape. Ayanna sensed it before the danger returned. She woke before dawn, the fire reduced to embers, her hand already gripping her blade. The silence felt wrong, stretched thin, as if the earth itself was holding its breath. The rancher was awake too, standing near the corral, staring toward the distant ridgeline where dust rose in faint, unnatural lines. Riders, not careless men this time, not drunk on cruelty. These moved with purpose, trained, organized. Someone had put a price on. Apache blood again, and this time, they were not coming to shame. They were coming to erase. Ayanna stepped beside him without a word. She no longer asked for permission. The humiliation she had once carried like a wound had hardened into something sharper. "They will not stop," she said quietly. You saved me, but they will want payment. The rancher did not look away from the horizon. Then they'll learn what it costs. She studied his face, weathered and tired, yet steady. He could still walk away. He could let her go, claim ignorance, survive. The West rewarded men who chose themselves. Instead, he loaded his rifle slowly, deliberately, as if every click of metal was a promise. That was when Ayanna understood something deeper than gratitude. This man was not protecting her out of pity. He was standing because turning away would make him less than what he believed a man should be. In her people's language, there was a word for that. Kind of soul, one that did not bend even when survival demanded it. She placed her hand over her heart briefly, a silent acknowledgement. They did not wait for the riders to surround the ranch. They moved first, slipping into the rocks and mesquite, becoming shadows among shadows. When the first shot rang out, it did not come from the ranch. It came from the land itself. One rider fell before he ever saw the enemy. Panic spread through the rest like fire in dry grass. Gunshots echoed, horses screamed, and dust swallowed the morning light. Ayanna moved low and fast, every step guided by instinct and memory. She was no longer a captive, no longer humiliated. She was Apache again, daughter of scouts, raised by a land that taught survival without mercy. The rancher fought beside her, not behind, not ahead, equal. Every time one of them fell back, the other covered the retreat. Trust formed in blood and breath, unspoken and absolute. But numbers have their own cruelty. By mid-morning, the riders had regrouped, spreading wide, pushing inward. The land that once protected now threatened to become a trap. Ayanna felt it then, the pull of something older than fear. This place was not just a ranch. It sat on ground her people had once passed through, hunted upon, died upon. She led the rancher toward a narrow ravine hidden beyond the cottonwoods. If we go there, she warned, we do not return the same. He nodded once. We already ain't. The ravine swallowed sound, turning gunfire into distant thunder. The riders followed, confident in numbers, blind in arrogance. They never saw the final stand coming. Rocks fell. Shots echoed from impossible angles. Men screamed names that the land did not remember. When it ended, the ravine was quiet again. Too quiet. Ayanna leaned against stone, her chest burning, her arm bleeding freely now that adrenaline had loosened its grip. The rancher tore cloth from his shirt and bound her wound without asking. His hands were steady, but his eyes were heavy. He knew this was not an ending. Only a pause. They will come again, he said. Yes, she answered, but not as hunters. That night, they did not return to the ranch. Smoke would guide enemies too easily. Instead, they climbed higher, where the stars felt closer and the past pressed in. Ayanna spoke then, not of pain but of choice. Her people were scattered, broken by war and betrayal, yet not gone. They hid in places maps refused to name. If I stay with you, she said, you will never know peace. If I leave, I carry your name with me. Either way, the world will change. The rancher stared into the fire for a long time. I lived alone thinking that was peace, he said finally. Turns out it was just quiet. Dawn broke with no riders in sight. Only wind, sun, and two figures standing at the edge of what they had been. Ayanna tied her hair back, the way warriors did before walking into uncertainty. The rancher saddled his horse not to flee, but to follow. No promises were spoken. None were needed. The West had already chosen. And if this story stirred something in you, if you believe honor still matters in a world that often forgets it, subscribe to the channel, because more untold West stories are coming. Stories of strength, survival, and the moments that define who we truly are when no one is watching.